Paul is communicating two really critical things. First of all, it's this reconciliation thing that has taken place for us. Again, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in him would be reconciled to him, is essentially what that means. What does reconciling mean? What does that word mean? For us today, when we use the word reconcile, it's usually with our bank account. You take your checkbook, you get a bank statement, and you're going to reconcile your checkbook to the bank statement. And you do that because you want to make sure that you are righted, that your status is righted, that it's in right state. And that is essentially what reconciliation is. Jesus came as Messiah to reconcile a lost and dying world, including the chosen ones, including the Jews, to himself, to God. For the wages of sin is death. So Jesus dies on a cross, pays the penalty for our sin so that we might be reconciled to him. But understand that that is simply just the beginning of the story. It does not end with our reconciliation. All of a sudden, we have a role to play. Once we are reconciled, then we become ministers of reconciliation. We then become his ambassadors to the very world that he just saved us out of. See, to have a healthy relationship with the world, we not only have to understand his passion for the world, but we have to undertake his passion for the world. Now pause for a moment and think about those that are around you. Neighbors, folks in the workplace, classmates, family. Those that are around you that are in your circle of influence that are lost, that are, quote unquote, of the world. You have a role to play in their lives as a minister of reconciliation. And there's a number of different passages that can kind of point to what that looks like. I think of Matthew 25. In Matthew 25, there's a picture that Jesus paints of what's going to happen at the end times. And he's going to separate out the sheep from the goat. And the goats, he's going to say, sorry, you missed out. Head on down to the place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. To those that are sheep, he's going to say, welcome into my heaven. Welcome into my paradise. And it's interesting because both groups ask a simple question. Why? Or what did we do? And he says, you know what? When you visited those in prison, you were visiting me. When you gave a cup of cold water to someone who asked, you did that unto me. When you clothed the naked, you did that unto me. And for those of you that are heading to the weeping and gnashing of teeth, you had the same opportunities, but you did not meet those needs. Those in our circle of influence, God has placed you in their lives for a reason. Oftentimes I've been guilty of praying for someone that's in need, and I would say something like, Lord, would you bring someone into their life that could really help them meet their needs? And he's like, didn't I, aren't you the one in their life? Why are you asking for me to bring somebody else? Why aren't you the one doing it? Aren't you my hands and my feet? Haven't I called you to the ministry of reconciliation? Aren't you my ambassador? You go and do it. Not only do we have to understand his passion for the world, but we have to undertake his passion for the world. And then the third one is we cannot underestimate the influence that the world can have on us, though. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to say that again. We can't underestimate the influence that the world can have on us, though. You see, once a believer experiences the reconciliation through Christ and then catches fire of that reconciliation and longs to go out and be a minister of reconciliation and ambassador, that young believer can get himself, herself in trouble if they don't understand a couple of things, because the world and the world's influence is strong. And the hooks of the world are really strong. And so there's a couple of things that we have to understand as believers before we go about doing this ministry, the business of ambassadorship. One is you got to know your boundaries. You got to know your parameters. You've got to know your weaknesses and your sin tendencies. And don't cross that line. I was saved when I was 21. For the previous 3 years, I was living, really more like 4 or 5 years, I was living a very hard lifestyle. Heavy partying, heavy drugs, heavy alcohol. And God just straight up delivered me out of that gloriously. It was amazing. Not even a single class at AA did I have to take. That's how significant of deliverance that happened in my life. And I was a part of a really tight-knit group at that point. And I had to pull myself straight out of that group. I had to separate myself from my closest friends because of the deliverance, because I knew if I didn't separate myself out from them, my deliverance probably wasn't going to last long. And I went to school. And about 6 months into school, I got an invitation to one of these friends' birthday party, turning 25. And I knew at this party it was going to be all the stuff. And it was going to be a real dark place to walk into. But I kind of felt a tug that I needed to go and be a light in that darkness. But understanding the deliverance that I had just experienced and really being mindful about my parameters and mindful about my weaknesses and my sin tendencies, what was I going to do to be able to go into that place and not have the world affect me, but me be able to affect the world? And what I did was I took an accountability partner with me. Complete stranger to that group. He didn't know any of them. He was simply there to be my guide, my accountability. And we walked into that place, and sure enough, it was dark, and all the stuff was there, and we just began to share the light. And sure enough, one got saved that very next morning, called us. He was too drunk to do anything about it that night, but that morning he called us and was gloriously delivered. You see, God has called us into the ministry of reconciliation. He's called us to be His ambassadors. But if we're going to do that and we're going to maintain a healthy relationship with the world, we have to understand what our weaknesses and what our sin tendencies are. Because, believe me, if you are a recovering alcoholic, the Lord is probably not going to be calling you to go to the bar and do ministry. What's going to happen? Okay? And if He is calling you to that place, you need to be mindful of your weakness, mindful of your sin tendency, and you need to go with accountability. That will keep you sober. Is this making sense? See, if we're going to have a healthy relationship with the world, we've got to understand His passion for the world. We've got to undertake His passion, and then we can't underestimate the influence the world can have on us. We are to be about the business of affecting the world without the world affecting us. Know your weaknesses. Be mindful of your sin tendencies. And the other thing is, we need to know God's voice. We need to be listening to His voice. and not following our own desires, which can and will lead us astray. See, if we're going to be His ambassadors, we need to be hearing from Him so we know where to go and be His ambassadors. I mean, doesn't that just is logical, right? It makes sense. What is He calling you to do? Where is He calling you to go? Who is He calling you to minister to? Listen to this quote from Susanna Wesley. Whatever weakens your reason, whatever impairs the tenderness of your conscience, whatever obscures your sense of God, whatever takes off your relish for spiritual things, whatever increases the authority of the body over the mind, that thing is sin to you, however innocent it may seem in itself. See, because I know what my weaknesses and my sin tendencies are, my walk has to be way more narrow in some areas than yours. Because if I allow it to be normal, like it, probably should be able to be, I will fall. Where others won't fall in that area. Because that's not their struggle. That's not their sin tendency. Is that making sense? I hope I'm not this isn't coming with confusion. And you got to know, you got to be self-aware of what the Lord has brought you out of, and that you don't end up back in that same mess. And that is exactly what the enemy wants to entice you to do, even with great opportunity. We need to have a healthy relationship with the world. Understand His passion. Undertake His passion. But don't underestimate the influence the world can have on you in the midst of being a minister of reconciliation.